Chapter 8: The Northern Renaissance. The Big Question. How did the Renaissance movement in Italy impact the artists of Northern Europe? Until now, we have only read about the Renaissance movement in Italy. The Renaissance reached other parts of Europe as well. Scholars and artists in other countries were also enjoying a rebirth of learning. Sometimes, these scholars and artists visited the city-states of Italy, especially Florence, and brought ideas and artwork back to their home countries. These countries included Germany and the region that used to be called Flanders, which is now part of the Netherlands and Belgium. We are going to read about 4 painters. 2 were German and 2 were Flemish, which means they were from Flanders. Because they lived in countries north of Italy, people often say they are part of the Northern Renaissance. The Master of Detail. Jan van Eyck was born in about 1390 CE. He lived in Flanders. Van Eyck's countrymen called him the King of the Painters. He is one of the early figures involved in the Northern Renaissance. Van Eyck painted at about the same time that Brunelleschi was working as an architect in Italy. Van Eyck developed new kinds of oil paint that gave his pictures a sharp and brilliant look. He discovered new ways to show light and texture in his paintings. He could realistically portray the tiniest details in a painting. In a painting of Giovanni Arnolfini, a portrait that Van Eyck painted for an Italian businessman living in Flanders, Van Eyck emphasized the texture of the subject's clothing, as well as the light pouring through the open window. Durer, Self-Portrait of the Artist. Albrecht Durer was born in 1471 CE to Hungarian parents living in Germany. He was just a little older than Michelangelo, who was born in 1475 CE. Durer was fascinated by the artistic developments happening in Italy at the time. He made 2 trips to Italy in order to learn as much as he could from the great masters. Durer was a proud supporter of the Renaissance movement. The very fact that he painted so many portraits and self-portraits demonstrates his desire to understand the humanity of his subjects. It shows his belief in the importance of the individual, especially one particular individual, himself. Durer began sketching himself when he was only 13, and would continue to capture his likeness in self-portraits throughout his career. In the self-portrait he painted in 1498 CE, Durer shows himself as a handsome young man with a taste for fine clothes. It is a painting that reveals how much he has been influenced by his Italian masters. In the famous self-portrait painted in 1500 CE, Durer looks directly at us with bold, confident eyes. Many portraits at the time showed the person from the side or a 3/4 angle, rather than head-on. Durer perfected the art of portraiture. His keen artist's eye captured not only a range of human expressions and emotions, but also that of skin tone and texture. Durer was not only a great painter, he was also a master of the art of making prints with woodcuts or engravings. As a young apprentice, he learned how to make woodcuts by carving pictures in blocks of wood, as well as engravings by using a sharp tool to cut an image into a metal plate. He would spread ink on the carved wood or the metal plate, then print the image on paper. Durer's woodcuts and engravings made him famous, partly because they could be quickly and easily reproduced, so many people could see them. Pieter Bruegel the Elder. Pieter Bruegel the Elder was born in the city of Antwerp, which is in the country we now call Belgium. He is called the Elder because his son, Pieter the Younger, was a painter too. Like Venice and Florence in Italy, Antwerp was a busy trading city with many banks and businesses, which meant there were many wealthy people ready to buy works of art. Most of these people wanted paintings in the style of the great Italian masters, such as Michelangelo and Raphael. so Bruegel traveled to Italy to see what he could learn. When it came to painting, however, Bruegel went his own way. You won't find heroic-looking muscular figures such as the ones Michelangelo painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. You won't find many scenes from classical mythology in Bruegel's work. His paintings are very different from anything like Botticelli's Birth of Venus. One of the few paintings in which Bruegel did choose to use a classical myth as the theme is Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. It's as though Bruegel were saying, "What's all the fuss about these myths? I'll give you a painting about a myth, but in my own way." Bruegel's way was to make the myth only a small part of the painting. He chose the Greek myth of Daedalus, the master inventor, and his son Icarus. For King Minos, Daedalus designed a giant maze called the Labyrinth, from which no one could escape. Later, when the king grew angry with Daedalus, he locked him in the labyrinth along with Icarus. But Daedalus soon came up with a plan to escape. Little by little, he gathered many feathers, then fastened them together with wax to make wings like those of a bird. He and his son used the wings to fly out of the labyrinth. But in his excitement, Icarus ignored his father's warnings not to fly too high. Up and up he flew until the sun began to melt the wax. The feathers fell from his wings, and down plunged Icarus into the sea. Bruegel's painting shows the fall of Icarus, though at first glance you might not even notice it. Look at the bottom right corner of the painting. Do you see two legs sticking out of the water near the ship? That's Icarus falling into the water, and that's all of the myth Bruegel chose to show. Bruegel draws our attention away from the myth and makes us look at everyday life, at the farmer plowing and the shepherd with his flock. Bruegel is best known for his pictures of everyday people. For example, he painted Peasant Wedding, also known as The Wedding Feast, in the late 1560s. Bruegel shows the peasants as he saw them. He doesn't try to prettify the scene. This is not a fancy feast. The simple food is being carried on rough boards. In the foreground, you can see a child licking her fingers, making sure she gets every last bit out of the bowl. In the middle left, the piper is looking hungrily at the food passing by. He's probably hoping there will be some food left for him after he finishes playing. Bruegel's sons, grandsons, and even great-grandsons became artists, but none equaled or surpassed his great works. Hans Holbein, the Younger. German painter, draftsman, and designer Hans Holbein the Younger, 1497 to 1543 CE, came from a family of notable artists. His father, Hans Holbein the Elder, was a renowned artist. His uncle and brother were acclaimed artists too. Following the tradition of Albrecht Durer, Hans Holbein the Younger was a master portrait artist. He knew many famous humanist scholars of the time and painted many of their portraits. For example, he created portraits of the great Renaissance scholar Erasmus and the English humanist Sir Thomas More. Hans Holbein the Younger was painting in Europe when religious division created a movement called the Reformation. He worked and painted at the court of King Henry VIII during this time of religious upheaval, when the English Church split apart from the Catholic Church and the Pope. He painted government ministers, church leaders, kings, queens, and at the time, controversial religious leaders. The leaders of the English Reformation asked Hans Holbein to create art that promoted the king as the new head of the church and the new religious movement. Art in every form was used to denounce the Pope and the old church. Men like Martin Luther and John Calvin challenged the authority of the Catholic Church, as well as its doctrine. Hans Holbein the Younger created a body of work that allows us to know the faces of the people who helped transform Western Europe.